Cruising cock-ups. That's what this podcast is all about. And the reason for that is because in episode 343, Jamie nearly lost a nipple. More on that later.
Oh, it makes me wince just thinking about it. Yeah. It was yet another cock-up on my behalf, of which there have been many over the years. And I just wanted to mention Rob Benfanati on Discord, who says, in relation to cruising cock-ups, mistakes shaped mankind. They really do. We literally grow up on our mistakes. Some of us do anyway. Anyway, he says there are two categories of sailors. Those who made stupid mistakes and liars.
Yes, because we all make those mistakes.
Yes.
We know people who never do, apparently. They live perfect sailing lives. So they obviously fall into the second category. Naming no names. The other thing we wanted to say was thanks to David Johnston, who's one of our followers.
He's one of our supporters.
Yeah, he's a proper supporter. Cheers, David. And he came up with this idea, didn't he, originally, some time ago?
Yeah, and as soon as he recommended this subject, and as soon as I read it, I thought, yep, we've got to do a podcast on this because it will be fun. But hopefully we'll all learn from our mistakes as well.
Yeah, I think, well, we certainly are still learning from our mistakes and have had great delight in reading some of your mistakes that you sent in.
Yeah, so we've put together a top 10 cruising cock-ups, and it's an amalgamation of some of our own personal cock-ups. And I'm happy to say, when we put it out there, a whole load of people came back with all their own cock-up stories.
Yes, it's not just us.
Many of which sound so familiar to us, though.
Yes.
So it was quite encouraging to
so hopefully it'll put people's minds at ease, because they'll see they're not the only ones as well. Hello, I'm Liz.
And I'm Jamie.
Welcome to Follow the Boat, in which we discuss what it's really like to give it all up to live on a boat.
And go travelling around the world. We've been doing it since 2006 and we're still at it.
Each week we talk about our latest YouTube videos.
And about boats, sailing, travel or anything else which floats into our heads.
And if you leave a comment we like, we'll give you an answer and a name check. Peace and fair winds. So we've got a few honourable mentions before we start the countdown that you put together. Terry Baker, shall I read Terry's? The biggest and most expensive was cutting out a 600-litre stainless steel water tank, only to find it was perfectly sound and the water leak was coming from elsewhere. Oh, God.
Yes. Well, that goes back to the previous podcast when we were talking about what was it, issues on the boat and how leaks can come from somewhere where you least expect it. But to actually go that far and cut out a perfectly decent stainless water tank, good on you, Terry, well done. There's one I did recently where we were in Bittung and we went shopping for a starter battery. Now I like to use sealed lead acid batteries because our starter battery sits under the chart table, it's difficult to get to, maintenance free, it's just nice and easy. And we must have spent a good half an hour with Google Translate talking to the young guys working in the shop to find the perfect starter battery.
Reading the labels on the batteries, all that.
And eventually I found one that was 110 amp hours, which is actually quite big for the space that we've got. And I thought, well, I've got to take this one. Took it back. Anyway, roll on a few months later and
constant problems.
Engine just would not start, and normally it comes down to cables, so we cleaned all the cables. And anyway, 18 months later, when eventually we decided, well, there's something wrong with this battery. When I took the battery out, I noticed there was a pool of purple water. It was sitting in purple water. And it wasn't a sealed lead acid, it was a proper flooded lead acid.
And it had flooded?
It had dried.
God.
It had completely dried. We'd never topped it up, so that could have been very, very dangerous, of course. But that's cock-up number 1849, I think.
Yeah, you only do them once, hopefully.
There was another cock-up I remember. Someone mentioned this to me before we did our refit, and if you've got a ceiling mounted fan, you need to keep an eye on them because they can work loose. And he told us this story of a fan that someone had left on, went ashore, the fan worked itself loose, came off the ceiling, fell on the floor, but of course the motor is continuing to spin, ended up causing a fire and burnt the entire boat out.
Yeah. So we learned from that lesson. We were told about that, and we've never done. And you're quite religious about turning breakers off, aren't you? So you know, obviously don't leave anything on when you're not on the boat, but in addition to that, turn the breaker off.
Yeah, and I'd mentioned it was before our refit, because in our refit I then made a point of putting all of our 12-volt fans on their own circuit, so I can isolate them with just one click. But yeah, that's one of the more serious cock-ups, I think.
Yeah.
We've got some funny ones though.
Yeah, so shall we start with the water maker nipple incident? For anyone who missed episode 343, where you do talk about it, and I have to admit that it actually makes me physically, the blood drain from my hands, but at the same time makes me giggle out loud.
Yes, I wasn't giggling at the time.
No.
Go and watch the episode, because I talk about it in detail.
Yeah.
But I ended up with this thing literally hanging off my chest, and because of the way that these membranes go into the tubes, it was very difficult to get out.
Yeah, watch 343. Should we say that to them now? Watch 343. But we did get a comment through from someone who had a very similar experience.
It was another hairy nipple story.
It was runaway sail on Instagram. I was being hauled up the mast by the Minister of Everything.
Love that.
When unbeknownst to me, my t-shirt got caught in the halyard block. It then proceeded to eat my chest hairs and moved right onto my right nipple. You know that feeling. This all happened in a split second. Luckily, the minister was able to reverse the procedure and I still had all my bits attached, minus some chest hairs. It's true, men can squeal. Just ask everyone in the marina.
That's exactly what happened to me. I was making so many weird noises, and 2 boats away were a load of local carpenters working on another boat, and God knows what they thought of the noises coming from our boat. But yeah, runaway sail, I'm there with you, mate. I know exactly how that feels. And I was wondering were they using electric winches, or because one of the problems is when you're at the top of the mast, communicating with the person down the bottom, you've really got to shout, and if you've got boats buzzing around you, the wind's blowing, it can be quite noisy. I think at one point we were actually using little handheld radios to talk to each other.
Yes, but it meant you had a hand that wasn't free, so it's hopeless. What you really need are super duper ones that, you know, that you just wear over your head, headsets.
Yeah, little Bluetooth headsets would be useful. Because I do remember a time in Langkawi when I got a neighbour to put me up the mast.
Right.
And you weren't around.
Yeah.
And we always use a safety line.
Yeah.
And I had to talk him through I told him all about it beforehand. I then had to talk him through the procedure as he got me up there. And when I finished the job at the top of the mast, I then said I'm ready to come down. And I watched him, and he literally opened both jammers on both halyards. And again, you should have, I think the whole of Langkawi heard me scream at that point.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Could have been really dangerous.
Did you know that liking and subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts helps us to get noticed? Go on, give us a helping hand.
Number 9, the prop.
Okay, this is my cock-up number 487 and 2094, I think. Yes, I've cocked up a couple of times. Now, this one wasn't one that people came back and commented on. But
this is our own personal hell.
This is a personal one, yeah. But again, in the video, I had said in episode 340, I think I had actually said to camera that I'd heard stories of people putting the prop on the wrong way round, gearing up there, wiring up there, gearbox the wrong way round, so that when you put the boat forwards, you end up going backwards into the stern.
It's one of your pet worries. You often verbalise it to me and I just ignore you.
Well, that's exactly what happened. We talk about it in episode 340, but as we're in the slip and Peter, the marina manager, is shouting, okay, go into a stern, nothing was happening. But actually what was happening was the boat was just going further forward into the cushions on the trailer. So yeah, that was a bit embarrassing.
Yeah, but you did blame it on somebody else though, didn't you?
Well, if you watch the video, there is video evidence of me putting that prop back together correctly. I've got it, go and have a look, and I get all the numbering right and all the gearing right, and then somewhere between that point and going in the water, something happened. Who knows?
Jury's out on whose fault that was, but it was still an embarrassing, stupid cock-up.
Well, there was another time, which was entirely my fault. We were in the Maldives on the island of Tilafushi, actually in a really good boatyard. It was a very good boat. It was really well equipped. Do you remember?
It was fantastic. It was the dirtiest boatyard I've ever been in, but it was fantastic.
Yeah. But anyway, I ended up putting the max prop back together with one blade just very slightly misaligned, literally one gear cog out.
It took us a while to realise that was the problem, didn't we?
Yeah, because when we got in the water and we motored away, the maximum speed we could do was 2 knots.
Yeah. There was a lot of crap in the water, an enormous amount, because it was actually colloquially known as Rubbish Island anyway.
Yes.
So there was a lot of, and we thought probably you got something wrapped around the prop, didn't we? But we'll just get away because it was difficult.
Yeah, and as you say, it took a while to work out the alignment of the blades was slightly out, because you've got to look at that prop square on and get the blades straight. But yeah, fortunately, we managed to go to one of the resort islands and got chatting to the dive master. Because all these resort islands have dive schools attached to them.
Yes, and of course it was a good wind there, so we did a lot of sailing. We didn't notice the prop that much, did we?
No.
Yes, but yes, go on, tell them how you got it sorted.
Well, I think either they didn't have any guests in the hotel or they had no diving scheduled for the day that we turned up. But the dive master was on it straight away. He was like, yep, leave it with
Let's
me.
go and have a look. Let's go and have a look.
He turned up with about three locals on the boat to come and watch the entertainment, and I think Mum and Dad were there as well.
Yeah,
they were also
we were all
watching.
Fascinated.
Yeah, but that took an hour of him and me underwater with all the dive gear on, taking this thing apart. And you can imagine taking apart a prop underwater.
Yeah. You dropped something, didn't you?
I dropped one Allen bolt.
Right, yeah.
And it dropped down to 20 metres, and I went down to get it, and he said, no, leave it with me. So anyway, that was embarrassing.
It was embarrassing, but it got fixed.
Yes.
Good news.
Okay, number 8, and this is one that is going to chime with a lot of people, I think, and that is seacocks.
I don't think we've actually got a seacock story. Do we have one?
I bet you we have.
But we've got some good ones that were sent in.
Yes.
Shall we read them?
Yep.
Terry Baker on Facebook. We sailed from Australia with 4 on board and forgot to open the outlet for the holding tank. Vent hose burst from the pressure and filled our master suite cabin with the overflow.
Oh dear.
Oh,
Just a reminder, holding tank, that's your black water waste. That's the stuff that comes through the toilet.
And it will fill up, and then you're supposed to either get it pumped out if you're near land, or you can let it go out to sea, which obviously he forgot to do.
Yes, 12 miles offshore officially, of course.
Right.
Yes. Stephen McPherson on Facebook also said, sailing from Lombok to Dampier, it's a long journey. I forgot that I had removed a failed shower pump. Of course, that was the Seacock that I didn't tighten properly. A day and a half into the trip, close hauled on a starboard tack in 25 knots with a seasick wife and a bilge half full of the sea, I was manually emptying 8 buckets of water an hour after the bilge, while solo sailing and caring for a sick wife and searching for the source of the water. Eventually I fixed it, but was more than exhausted than it is safe to be.
That does sound horrendous. Miserable.
Yeah.
God, poor thing.
I do remember when we were sailing quite hard and we got some water ingress, and I think it was probably from the rudder stock leaking through the lazarette under the bed and working its way down, like all water, travelling uphill and in the galley, yes, and we ended up with water in the galley, but that wasn't a Seacock problem. But
yes, because he was saying that he had to manually pump because the boat was so heeled that the electric pump bilge wouldn't work. He had to do it manually. Bloody hell. And then Antonia.
Oh, this is a classic.
Antonia Webb on Facebook. When we were very green boat owners, we had problems with our 40-year-old engine. We asked the marina mechanic to have a look and do everything he could. It was a big bill, but we were expecting it and happy to pay it. As we settled up, the yard director told us a story about someone who went out without opening the Seacocks and damaged their engine. Oh, the silly people, we said. How could you forget to open your Seacocks? On our first sail, we'd barely left the marina when the engine began to make odd noises. Guess the engineer didn't fix it after all, we said, and we came back to our berth. You've guessed it, we'd forgotten to open the Seacocks and had to fork out for a second unwanted engine bill that was wholly our own fault.
Yes, that is a potentially, perhaps one of the most expensive mistakes you can make on the boat. Anything to do with the engine, if you deprive it of that cooling water and keep the engine running. Of course, the engine will start making weird noises, as they say, but you should have an alarm on the engine as well that will be sounding your temperature. should be going over because it's not getting cooled. When that alarm goes off, rather than running around trying to find the location of the cause, the first thing you should do is turn the engine off.
Right. Okay.
Very first thing.
If you can.
If you can. Of course, sometimes you end up in situations where, you know, you need the engine to be running. But if you continue to run the engine and it's overheating, it will do irreparable damage to it. So.
Yeah. Blown head gaskets and all that.
Yes, but I think we've all laughed at other people's stories only to then do the same thing ourselves later on.
Yes. And she does go on to say that after 5 years of sailing, they've never made the same mistake again.
I should think not. I hope not. Yeah, check your Seacocks every time.
Yeah.
At number 7, I've just put kill cord here. And this just chimed with me because Petru on Discord said that they were doing a safety boat duty on a race, on a regatta, and they got dropped off on the rib, tied to the buoy. So that's where you just have to sit by one of the buoys.
All on your lonesome.
Yeah, in the blazing heat. It can be quite unpleasant. But the engine wouldn't start on his dinghy. And he checked everything and double checked, and he even got the engine cover off, only to realise he had forgotten the kill cord, which was 20 minutes wasted.
So for those that don't know, the kill cord on many, but not all, motors has to be engaged in order for it to start.
Yeah, you have a little button that needs to be pulled out to start the engine, and the idea of the kill cord is that it plugs into this switch to keep it poking out, so the engine will start, but then it's wrapped to a elasticated line which you put around your wrist.
Yes, that's the important thing. It's attached to you.
Correct. And the idea is that, you know, if ever you're thrown out your dinghy with the engine running, as soon as you come out, the kill cord comes off, because what will happen invariably is that the engine will always swing to one side.
Yeah.
And then the dinghy just goes around in circles.
There are some terrible stories
Horrible.
of people being killed by dinghies doing that, with them being sliced by the props.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's really important. Engage that kill cord and use it.
But that story did chime with me, because I have spent 2 or 3 occasions, I think, where you're trying to start the outboard and it will not start without that kill cord, and I've ended up swearing and cursing and checking the fuel lines, and it happens.
I wonder how many people watching have done that. I'd be interested to know.
I can guarantee you the majority of people who own an outboard for their dinghy have done this at least once.
Yes. Will they own up to it? Number 6 then, fuel. This is one of your favourites.
Yes, anything to do with fuel. We've all made mistakes. I mean, you hear of actually some of the worst stories of people that fill up their fuel tanks thinking it's the water tanks.
Oh, God.
So you end up diluting your fuel with water, or vice versa, putting fuel in your water tanks.
I made a really stupid mistake, not on a boat, in a car in France. It was someone else's car, and didn't read the fuel properly and put diesel in a petrol car. Right.
Now, I think
that was really bad.
A petrol car can't run on diesel, but I think a diesel can run on petrol, but very badly. Anyway,
this was a lovely old BMW.
Yes, not a good cock up to
No.
me. But Bearpaw on Discord said that they route the fuel line over the propeller shaft, and of course it's secured by a plastic clip. And when repairing the exhaust hose, they remove the line and the plastic clip, but during reassembly, they forgot to attach the plastic clip back on. Needless to say, in the middle of the channel, the propeller shaft wore through the fuel line and spread diesel fuel throughout the engine bay. Messy.
Feel your pain having to clear that bloody stuff up.
Yeah, it's horrible. There was a time I remember when I forgot to put the cap back on the Raycor water separator properly.
Oh yeah.
And we were sort of motoring down the coast, and I wondered where this horrendous smell was coming from. And of course, when I opened up the engine bay, fuel was just literally being pumped out all over the engine.
I don't remember that. Maybe you didn't tell me.
No, it was a messy affair.
Oh.
Messy affair.
Number 5, we've just called hatches, and this is probably my favourite of all of them, because we've cocked up big time on hatches. The first one is coming into Egypt for the very first time. We'd crossed the Med. We were very pleased with ourselves. It was the longest crossing we'd ever done on Esper. Came into the Med, came from the Med into Port Said. I don't know if anyone's done this before, but as you can probably imagine, it is an intensely busy part of any sea anywhere in the world, I should think. There are lanes all over the place. The chart, particularly for fairly new sailors, it's a little bit, I don't know, like Spaghetti Junction.
Confusing.
Really confusing. But you have certain channels that you have to follow, and we were desperately trying to work out which way to go. It was a nice sunny day, quite flat.
Pretty flat, yeah.
Great big container ship of some kind, like many, but quite close to us, coming towards us. And we were looking at the channel and looking at the all looked okay. We weren't going to hit, but of course he was much closer than we were much closer to him than we should have been. And his bow wave, which was about as high as Esper, came straight at us as he went past and shot all the way down the boat, straight through all our hatches.
Yes, because we'd left the hatches open.
Exactly.
Being newbies, you know, it's a sunny day. Why would you close your hatches?
And it was slow motion. We knew it was going to happen just before it happened. It was too late to go down and change anything. And this wave just went right across the front cockpit, back, and straight down into the saloon, straight into the front. Oh my God, sea water everywhere.
Do you know there was an additional cock up in that story?
Oh yeah?
Yes. I actually thought that container ship was at anchor.
Oh, I didn't realise you thought that.
It was moving so slowly.
Yes.
And we were approaching it, and I don't know, I just assumed it was at anchor, but it wasn't. It was moving slowly, but, you know, fast enough to create that bow wave. But that's just one of many occasions. The side hatches in our saloon, we either never closed or we never quite secured them properly, and that's where our bookcases are either side. And I've lost count of the amount of books we have lost that have been flooded with salt water.
Yeah, we don't do it anymore.
No, surprisingly not, no.
We did do it a lot to begin with. It wasn't, you know, now obviously we've got a routine that we follow every time we up anchor. And we're religious about doing it no matter what the weather and how far the distance. That's another thing you have to think about. But the biggest thing I have, the biggest cock up I think, is that when we put the new tow rail on, when we did the refit, we saw another boat that had gaps in the tow rail, which we thought looked really quite attractive, and it would allow all the debris to go over the edge of the boat, because you collect so much crap, don't you? So we put these gaps in thinking this is a really good idea, and it's great, and it does work, and the stuff does go over the edge. But the two front ones are immediately above the two port lights, one on by my office and one over the top bunk, and it means that all the water is funneled straight down there, straight into the port, and comes in the port light. We discovered that in Pangnar Bay when we were out having a lovely time. It pissed with rain, got back on the boat, and the top shelf in my office was about 3 inches of water.
Yes.
Destroyed most of our paperwork.
Yes, that was a design error, I suppose.
It was, and that's entirely our fault.
But also, as you say, you know, leaving them open. Why are you leaving them open? And I know a lot of people, when they go ashore, even if it's just for a quick beer at sundown, tend to leave their boat open. No, actually, from an insurance point of view, we're not really covered unless the boat is locked up. I believe something along those lines.
It's like going out with the windows open in your house.
Yeah, we do, as a matter of course, do close all the hatches, but also, especially in the tropics, of course, you can get weather systems that come through which aren't predicted. They come through very, very quickly, and of course, it's a deluge of heavy rain. You can very quickly flood your boat. I mean, there's so many occasions when we've been ashore with other yachties who have to jump in their dinghy and race back to the boat. Yes, but we've all done it. We've definitely all done it. But Wens on Discord also says, not putting everything away and having a huge squall come out of nowhere and smashing us. She had to go down below to try and save things while getting seasick. Eggs were jumping out of the hammock, shit flying from one side of the boat, and then the saloon table fell over. Complete nightmare. Never again will I think, it's just a little sail. We'll be all right. Light winds, all good. No way. From that moment on, the cabin is totally secure when we set sail. Lesson learned. So that's going on from keeping the hatches closed is just being, you know, prepared for the bad weather that comes through.
Always assume the worst.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about a few sailing mistakes.
Okay.
I mean, there are too many. You could do a whole series on just that.
We don't make sailing mistakes, do we?
We've got a couple here that we're going to read out, but you did put down a couple of little ideas of our own.
I mean, it was less of a mistake, but I remember we used to have a problem with halyard wrap on our foresail, and halyard wrap is where the halyard that comes out the top of the mast is perhaps not tight enough, or the angle isn't quite acute enough. So when you try and furl away, what happens is the top of the halyard wraps around your foil, and it prevents you from furling your sail away. And this used to happen quite a lot on our boat.
Yes, it would be right for a bit and then it would happen again. We've sorted it now, but yeah, one particular occasion.
One particular occasion was as we were approaching land, having done a 2-day sail, I think, not far from land at all, and suddenly we were hit by one of those squalls we were just talking about.
We had all the sails up. We were going towards this anchorage, which looked perfect, in the middle of nowhere, remote, you know, typical Indonesia, nothing, nobody there. And we just couldn't get that sail down.
No.
So I would say there's lots of lessons learned there. You put your sails away in good time. It was far too close to our anchor point.
I think we were just enjoying the sails so much, weren't we? But
Hero sailing.
We should have put them away earlier.
And then we would have found out there was a problem.
Yeah. But the only way out of that, because we could not get this sail away, and in fact at one point the sheet was whipping so hard it actually hit the dodger window and left a great big mark in it. The only option we had was to turn the boat around, tack the sail and sail into the squall, but away from land. Yeah,
well, we had our track. We knew we couldn't see anything because of whiteout. So we had to use the track, we had to use the chart to get out, but that was the only option. You couldn't do anything else. And so that was fine, and we knew it would only be quick because it was one of these squalls that you get here, 15, 20 minutes. So we just sailed and sailed and sailed until it died down.
But I think there's a fine line though, isn't there, about putting your sails away too early and having to motor the last mile. You know, when you're enjoying that sail and you know, you're on a sailboat, you want to be sailing as much as possible.
You see, I don't agree with you. I always think we should do things much earlier than you do. Yes. I always think you leave lots of things to the last minute. It's the hero sailor of you, and the belt and braces of me.
Not true.
Radioing ahead to Marinas, you never want to do it to the last minute, despite the fact after 10 years we know there's never anyone there and it takes 20 minutes to get hold of them. Anyway. Bicker.
There was another time when I was doing some hero sailing. We had our friends Matt and Candice on board way back in Turkey, so this is when we first bought the boat. And we had a cruising shoot which I'd just learnt how to set, and we were sailing back from Greece towards Turkey, and it was into a bay that had a dead end basically, so it was a long channel, but once you got to the end that was it. And I think I was probably just showing off and put the cruising chute up, and it was a good 20 knots. You know what those Meltemis are like in Turkey.
Like here.
And we were steaming along so quickly, we were quickly running out of space, of sea room, but more importantly, I couldn't drop the sail because there was so much wind. I can't remember what happened in the end. We probably turned the boat around and corkscrewed the whole sail.
Well, it was a good way to learn how to use light wind. Well, not to use a light wind sail. Yeah. I'm going to read Jamie's. Shall I read Jamie's?
Yep. Oh, Jamie Pando.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. He's one of our long-time supporters and he always has funny stories. I'm only doing part of it. If you go on Facebook, you'll see the full recount. Anyway, leaving an inlet, I unfurled the mainsail, started out into the ocean in 25 knots of wind, and upon seeing the mountains of water coming towards us, decided to turn round and run for cover. An accidental jibe changed the traveller into quite a different shape than before.
Yeah, we've bent a few things on the boat, haven't we?
Yes, we have. Yeah, so there you go.
Petra on Discord says that it was the first race of Burnham Race Week, and he was afraid that his spinnaker, this is on his little sailing dinghy, was going to pop out of the bag going upwind. So he clipped all 3 lines down into the spinnaker bag. They had a downwind start, which obviously meant putting the spinnaker up straight away. But he forgot 2 things. He'd forgotten that he'd clipped the whole spinnaker away into the bag,
right.
But more importantly, he'd forgotten to tell his partner.
Oh, that sounds familiar. Yes, there you go.
So as soon as the race started, they hoisted the spinnaker, and the whole spinnaker and the bag went straight up the top of the mast.
Oh, gosh.
He's happy to report that he and his partner are still sailing together. So.
Yeah, you do have to be forgiving, don't you? But I think on the whole, one of the many rules is if you think you should reef, reef. Don't leave it till too late. If you think you should do something, do it then. Don't leave it too late.
Yes, it's a classic adage, isn't it? When you think of reefing, do it.
So that happened to us in the Maldives. We didn't reef when we should have.
Well, to be fair, that was because we didn't know there was a squall coming. But I think that particular incident could be classed as a knockdown.
Yes, it was.
I mean, I remember we had the old solar panels hanging off the back of the boat, which are actually much shorter. And we were heeled over so much that those panels were slicing through the water. Yeah,
so basically we were running along the side of an atoll, which was giving us protection we didn't realise. And as we went past it, it turned to night, so we couldn't really see anything. But we had a friend on a boat that was further over that way, and he suddenly blaring on the radio, "There's weather, there's a storm, there's a storm." And then he cut out, and the next thing, we're on our side.
I mean, I think it was about 10 seconds between him radioing through and it hitting us. We had no time to reef the sail. I seem to remember for the majority of that squall, I was just hanging off the mizzen.
You were holding onto the mizzen, you weren't clipped on, I wasn't clipped on.
Yeah, and I was trying to reef the mizzen, but there was so much wind, I just could not get. By the way, we've got in-mast furling, and it does mean that although you can get away with reefing the sail off wind, if there is too much wind, you just can't. You can't do it. We just had to literally.
I had to just hold the boat so that it wouldn't go over. I remember just gripping vice-like on the wheel to make sure, and having a very good wind indicator on the boat because you couldn't see anything. So I was able to hold the wind in exactly the right position to stop us going over any further. I think we must have gone round in a circle at least.
I think we probably should have gone round in a circle ultimately, but it all happened so quickly, and I
never forget.
But of course, well, there was another time when I spun Esper on a sixpence back in Turkey, got hit by a catabatic and turned the boat 180. I think we mentioned this recently. Turned the boat 180 degrees literally on the spot, just from a gust of wind. But no doubt, every sailor has a sailing cock-up where you've not managed the sails correctly. We've all done it, and of course it is how you learn how to manage your sails ultimately.
And what your boat's capable of, and what you're comfortable with. I mean, we're much less gung-ho. We would very seldom now sail at night with all the sails out.
Oh, absolutely not.
Just wouldn't do it, would we?
Just wouldn't do it.
It means you're going a bit slower, but it's safer. Yeah.
Definitely.
Right, well, sailing mistakes, loads of those. Please let us know yours in the comments. We love reading them. Always makes us feel a bit better about ourselves.
If you find this topic interesting and would like to continue the conversation, come and join the Follow the Boat Discord community. Look for the link in the description. It's free.
Now, the top three are very entertaining, and hopefully, again, we'll all learn something from these, but we've saved some classics. So coming in at number 3, you've put Marina, Shame and Destruction.
Yes. So
we've all been there. We've all come into a marina or exited a marina, and we've made a little mistake.
And what makes it worse in a marina is there's loads of other people there whose heads all pop up like meerkats out of the companionway to watch, don't they?
Yes. When you come into the marina, there's no one there. After the mistake happens, everyone is watching. I mean, it happened to me in Turkey when we had problems with our gearbox, and I was on my own, but they had marinaros trying to shove me into the smallest of spaces in Bodrum Marina with that Meltemi, that northerly wind blowing really hard. And the mistake really was that I shouldn't actually have just gone in. I shouldn't have gone into the marina. I should have gone to anchor instead. But the problem was, of course, is that as I was being pushed back, I couldn't engage gear forward to counter the backwards motion.
Right.
And our swimming platform
the gearbox was broken, wasn't it?
Yeah, ended up taking out the electricity pedestal on the pontoon. And again, that was another classic. As soon as you hear this, all these heads popped up.
That was a great introduction to all the people there.
Yes. But Lee Turnbull on Facebook, let's kick off with him.
Yes, go on.
You hear of people doing this, and I thought it was all just anecdotal, but here is someone who admits to doing this not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Yeah, so Lee says, I used to be known as the Blue Flash at Dubai Offshore Sailing Club due to forgetting to unplug the shore power. We've done that, haven't we? Right in the very, very early days.
Have we?
Yeah, we have.
I don't know.
Did it 3 times. Last beer at the bar before heading out racing. Down to the boat, crew on board, engine on, drop the lines and go. Bang! Bugger! Shore power cable drops in the water, tripping the power to our onshore supply. If lucky, the whole pontoon if unlucky. Walk of shame after racing to get the power switch back on.
I love that. Walk of shame. I have seen boats leave with their shore power cable attached. I think we did perhaps do it once.
We never actually left.
No, we've never left, but we have. I think there was one time when the person helping slip our lines pointed it out before slipping the lines. Yeah, easily done, easily. Susie Harris on Facebook says, just after leaving the pontoon somewhere in Spain, we realised we were still plugged in. The crew jumped to it and unplugged the boat, reasoning we could go around and come alongside to pick it up. Meanwhile, a helpful neighbour, spotting our dilemma, quickly pulled the plug on the pontoon end. The cable sank like a stone, never to be seen again.
Oh, the pain losing a cable, isn't it?
Oh yeah, they're expensive things, aren't they?
So there you are. The moral there is don't be helpful. No. Communicate? I don't know. Just don't do it. Matt Plank simply says, leaving the dock while still tied to said dock. Still tied on. Off we go.
Have done that. Did it only recently in Kota Kinabalu. I remember trying to leave and I'd left one bow line on.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's probably what Matt did.
Yeah, there are so many of these. Kim Revel on Facebook says, we were docking in gusty conditions. The bowsprit swung around and took out the fire hydrant and power on the dock. Yeah, join the club, Kim. I haven't been back since. We cart our water and fuel in jerry cans by the tender now.
So that's just a few Marina walk of shame and destructive moments from us and from you guys.
But we know you've all done it. Come on, spill the beans. Let us know in the comments.
Admit it, get it off your chest. You'll feel so much better. Anchoring is the next one, and
number 2, anchoring.
It could easily be 2 podcasts just on anchoring.
I think it's almost worth coming back to this and doing an entire podcast on this. Everyone has an opinion on anchors, and I can guarantee you every cruiser has an anchoring mishap story as well.
Apart from those that never ever drag or never have a problem.
Yes.
There are those out there.
Well, there's the first story, which I've mentioned before. I won't go into detail. When I didn't quite set the anchor properly in Greece, and it was very lots of grass. That's right. It was lots of grass on the seabed, so the anchor just didn't take. And anyway, it dragged during the night, and I ended up hitting the boat behind me and smashing our solar panel.
I think alcohol was part of that, wasn't it?
Yes, it could have been. Yes, alcohol and moussaka.
Yes. You've written towing dinghy. What does that mean?
No, you wrote towing dinghy.
Did I? I don't know what that means.
No. But actually, talking of towing dinghy, there was a great story that we were told while in Turkey. We didn't see this, but one of our friends used to run charter boats. And what happens in Turkey is that you quite often do what you call med mooring. And the idea with med mooring is that you drop your anchor and you back up to a pontoon, to a rock, to a tree, and you take that line ashore.
It's the normal way over there because there's so little room. You have to go very close in, and it's the only way most anchorages do actually moor the boat, isn't it?
Yeah. It's difficult to do on your own. I have done it on my own before now. But yeah, so the idea is that once you've tied ashore, you then go back to the front of the boat and you tighten up the anchor chain, and the two obviously stretch and they keep you in position so that you're not swinging. Very useful for tight spaces. But anyway, this friend of ours told us the story that he witnessed.
He was sitting in a taverna with a beer, looking out as you do.
Yep, and watched a charter boat come in. And they dutifully dropped the anchor, put out probably 30, 40, 50 metres, knowing Turkey actually, very deep waters, so they would have been putting out a lot of chain.
Nice light boat, anchored straight back.
Backing it up, and went to tie the line ashore. Where's the dinghy? Oh, the dinghy's round the front. They'd left the dinghy towed out the back, and of course as they swung the boat back, the dinghy had swung round to the front of the boat, underneath the bow, and they had dumped 50 metres of chain and the anchor straight in the dinghy.
He could see it happening. You could see that the chain was just going, the anchor just goes straight in. So nobody had gone to the front to check what was going on. I mean, you really do, if you're going to put your anchor down, need to go and see what's going on.
Yeah, George Rush on Facebook set his anchor without securing the bitter end. He says, fortunately, he was only in 30 feet, so he was able to retrieve it. But, you know, retrieving an anchor at 10 metres...
That's still a lot.
That's pretty good going, George.
Yeah,
well
done, mate. Now, anchoring is the one where I have to hold my hands up entirely to say this was my fault. And it was recent, because all of the others have been your fault.
Why is that?
Because you're the skipper and you have to take ultimate responsibility. Anyway, but yes.
That's very kind of you. Thanks for admitting that.
Where are we? So, what happened was we dumped the chain, realised we had to get out sharpish, panicking, Liz head going round and saying, oh, I need to bring it up, looking at everything, looking at how close the land was, and not checking the gypsy, and all the chain bunched up.
Yes, to explain, we have to flake the chain in our anchor locker,
Yep.
and that means just paying it out as it comes through the hawser, and you flake out the chain so that it doesn't bunch up into a big pile and back up around the gypsy, around the capstan. So, because you didn't do that, the chain backed up, and anchor chain turns into solid metal, like a solid metal block.
It's bizarre. Now, I have done it before when it's bunched up in the locker and then backed up. But I've always been able to sort it out. It's always easy, all right, just drop it, lift it, drop it, spread it. No, but this was solid. And of course it's in the worst, you know, it's just sod's law, it's the worst possible place.
Oh, the anchorage?
Yeah.
Oh, it was horrendous. I don't even know why we tried to get into this anchorage.
No, ridiculous. It was tiny.
No room. Tiny
channel, not deep enough. We were tired. We'd done an over. Oh, God, it was just awful. And I just could not. I wasn't in tears, but I was close to tears because I could not budge it. So you had to get the boat out with the anchor still, I don't know, a couple of metres under the boat.
That's right, yeah, hanging over the bow, and just get into open water, into clear water, just to buy some time, basically, and the sea room.
And it wasn't easy, was it?
It wasn't, no. I ended up having to dismantle something off the gypsy in order to then get to something. Anyway, it took a while. I think I ended up hitting it with a hammer, probably.
I think you probably did, yeah. While I sat at the back crying over a cup of tea. But you did do it, and we were able to anchor. But that was, that was me taking my eye off the ball. And it's a very subtle and quick process dropping anchor on Esper, and usually fine. But Jamie Panda again has another story.
Jamie again, yeah, love Jamie's stories.
This is a very long one. I'm not going to read it all. I'm going to read a bit of it. It's on Facebook. Look at Facebook. You'll read the whole thing. But he says, we're anchored in Lake Worth in an anchorage less than desirable. I felt it was the wrong place for us to spend the night, so we hoisted the anchor and travelled a few hundred yards south to a very nice place. Kim's in charge of the anchor and snubber and always does a really great job. But this time she hoisted so fast that the anchor chain jammed on the gypsy and could not unjam it, no matter what we did. So there you go.
Exactly the same story.
Yeah, I thought I was the only one.
You normally do a very good job, don't you?
Thank you.
I can put all my faith in you when it comes to weighing the anchor. But yeah, just keep an eye on that chain.
Well, that's just a few anchoring stories. I'm sure that you will have more.
Yes, well, now, this anchoring story leads us nicely into our #1 cruising cock-up, because it involves both anchoring and
running aground.
Yep, running aground. It had to be #1, didn't it?
It did.
But Rob Benfinati on Discord, he says, my mistake was anchoring just for a break and a swim in the North Adriatic Sea and then deciding to stay for the night. No wind, clear blue sky without a single cloud. But he hadn't set the anchor properly and ended up on the rocks during a very short but violent 45-knot thunderstorm.
God, the Med has those.
I managed to escape with a partially broken rudder and a dent in the keel, but since then, more than 30 years ago, I always anchor as if I have to stay for days and withstand severe conditions.
Could not agree more.
There's a lot to be said for properly setting the anchor, and yeah, I mean, that is just your worst nightmare. first of all anchoring issues and then actually running aground, because quite a few of these running aground stories are narrow escapes, but you do hear of these more serious stories like Rob's where you do damage to the boat.
Yes, so yeah, do anchor properly, and yeah, it's just a serious matter. And in fact, with 45 knots, we would have been anchor watch immediately out there watching.
Yeah, but I mean, you know what these squalls are like, they come in so quickly. Just before we talk about us, we've got to mention Stuart Mackenzie.
Yeah.
Mac, who's another one of our supporters, who has just recently bought a boat for the first time. He's got himself a lovely 48-footer. He said, just a couple of months since taking over this boat, I hit a large sandbar outside Yacht Haven Marina here in Phuket, which I know Jamie knows well.
Anyone who knows Phuket knows this particular bar.
Well, and also this featured in one of our early episodes when you were back in the UK. And I was with our friend Brendan, and we witnessed exactly the same thing that Mac did it. And he says, you can't miss it. It was embarrassing, but a great source of amusement to other yachties, especially when months later being introduced to someone who'd say, oh, that was you. Reputation proceeding.
I remember the one with you and Brendan. You're sitting in the bar having a few beers, watching this, and pissing with laughter. Oh dear, how mean.
Yeah. Captain No Claw Discord, he says that when he bought his boat, they had to motor about 500 miles to get back to home, wherever that may be. With very little sleep, due to dragging anchors every night, they decided to pull into a little anchorage he knew was good holding. But as the night drew in, it was getting rough. I asked the other half to check the tides, brackets, she checked the wrong area.
No, it's her fault.
And said, yeah, it's a rising tide. I thought, well, it's all sand, so if we do bottom out, we'll just refloat and no harm. Turned out the tide was actually falling and the channel had moved since I was last there.
Oh.
So we spent a few hours laying on our side. Luckily for us, our boat is okay to lay over and dry out, but I can see that situation being very bad for anyone with a fin keel and exposed rudder. He then adds, that was the first good night's sleep I had, knowing the anchor wasn't going to drag. Now we technically haven't run aground. I think when you think of running aground, you think of, you know, steaming along at 5-7 knots or however fast your boat can go and just hitting something. And of course this happens. There are famous stories of this happening. But the one time we hit the bottom was when we were with our friend American, who was on his boat, and we were going into PSS Marina,
yes,
or boatyard. And the entrance to PSS is up a very shallow river.
Yeah.
It goes down to 3 meters and it turns 90 degrees, and it's all mud, it's just a mud bank. And in fact, if you look on satellite images of this one particular corner, you can see track marks where more powerful fishing boats have just ploughed through the mud.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can see all these track marks, and I think we'd just taken the corner too wide, and Esper just basically slowed down and ground down to a halt when we realised we'd actually just ploughed into mud.
There was some question about the accuracy of the charts as well, I think.
But the charts show you nothing. It's satellite imagery only, and using other people's waypoints. We're fortunate that we haven't had that instant, but there was another time, wasn't there, when we were in sailing up. Actually, shortly after we'd wrapped our sail in that squall, further up the coast, remember we almost hit the bottom?
No. I obviously blanked that from my memory.
It was, it was on the charts, this patch said 10 metres.
Oh, there, yes, awful. Gosh, yeah, go on.
And we were motor sailing, and we were about to hit this 10-metre mark when the depth just came up so quickly. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, slammed the boat into a stern, full astern. And it got down to 3 metres or 2 metres under the keel.
Good to see, you could see the fish's eyes looking at you. Yeah, that was scary, and that was simply because obviously the chart gave me nothing, so we were using satellite imagery, and you had your phone, I had my phone, but we were using, one was using Bing, one was using Google, can't remember, but my phone showed it much more clearly. And you weren't using my phone, obviously, you were using yours, and yours hadn't shown it. So not only are the charts not showing things, but if you don't get the right satellite image, you're not going to see things. So it was there, but to find it would have been quite hard. So.
But I mean, how remiss of the chart to show 10 metres shallowest water when it was clearly we were going to hit it. That was the single scariest moment of our entire cruising career. And I think it was partly because we were just so remote, you know, so far away from anywhere. If we had hit that and done damage to the boat, we would have been royally screwed. We hadn't seen a boat for 2 days. So,
yeah, I think that it's important that we get this message across to anybody who's thinking of doing very remote sailing like we do a lot of over here, because the charts are simply not accurate. So when you're going in close or you're going anywhere near reefs, you've got to eyeball and you've got to use satellite imagery. And if you're going to use satellite imagery, you need internet connection, and a lot of these places don't have that. So you've got to cache those images, you've got to cache your maps right into the closest depth you can for that entire area beforehand. So yeah, not easy.
Sorry for interrupting, but while I've got you here, if you like what we do and you want to support us and become a Patreon, or join us on FTP Mates, or even drop a quid in the rum fund, go to followtheboat.com/pub. Of course, come to the pub.
SVZ on YouTube said...
Do you mean SVZ?
I don't know. SVZ? SVZ?
You say Z, I say Z. Anyway, whoever you are.
Please let us know. They've commented before. We've read out their comments before, and they've always got great comments. And they said that not zooming in far enough on the charts and completely missing a massive reef that was miraculously we sailed over for who knows how long. Before, they caught a fish on the line that made them look over the side and notice just how shallow they were. A hard port turn still had us a good 10 minutes of nail-biting sailing before we were in safe waters. Once I checked the charts properly, it's embarrassing to think how I could miss such a large, seemingly never-ending reef. However, the mahi-mahi was delicious, which is good to hear. I now take chart plotting very seriously, as I hope you should. Yeah. But that zooming in, it happened only here, actually. On the chart plotter in the cockpit, I couldn't see a certain reef and only noticed it by zooming in on my phone. Plotted the mark from the phone onto chart plotter, but only when I zoomed in on the chart plotter did I notice it was there.
I mean, there's the famous story in the Volvo ocean race, I think 10 years or so ago, where they were just hooning it along and hadn't done exactly that. They were using, obviously, very sophisticated charts and hadn't noticed they were about to hit a reef. They hit the reef and were out of the race. So that's a perfect example of not zooming.
Yeah. And Dutch Globetrotter says, running aground in my local waters, I knew exactly where the sandbank was, but was too busy chatting with my friends. Luckily, we have huge tides here in the Netherlands, so after a few hours, there was enough water under the keel to sail off, but still very embarrassing.
And that's a really good illustration of just getting too complacent. You think you know your area like the back of your hand.
Yeah. Well, Captain Nokley said that his channel had moved, and of course, certainly places like the east coast of the UK, those sandbanks are always moving. So you do have to, you know, stay aware all the time, even in very familiar waters. It's
the same around here, isn't it? Because we have some very big rivers coming off off the islands around Indonesia, huge rivers, and they silt up and then they clear and then they sort of bore themselves out, and so it's always different every time you go past.
Yep, and then Chris Oliver on YouTube says, being complacent regards navigation and making a turn before I should on a passage from St Malo to St Helier. And he said the light was fading, but the weather was good. That's a recurring theme in all these cock-ups, isn't it? The weather was good. We could see St Helier. Never have I done a 180-degree turn and backtracked so carefully when I realised I was amongst the rocks. I was very lucky that day, but it scared me terribly. It was a lesson I'll never forget and a reminder of the great responsibility you have for the people on board who were quite unaware we were heading into danger. And he adds that this was actually before GPS, but they were still using Decca navigation. So there were no excuses, he says, for not properly plotting the turn.
Yeah, it just shows you, doesn't it?
And that got me thinking, this idea of before GPS. You know, there was a time, of course, when boats cruising around the world for centuries without the technology we have probably wouldn't actually be going into some of the places that we now venture.
You couldn't, because the reefs are literally all around you. and you can't always eyeball if you've got the wrong weather and the wrong light.
That's right. So I suspect there are many reefs, anchorages within reefs that we've now been to, which up until 30 years ago, people didn't try and attempt. They would have anchored further out and perhaps rowed ashore or taken the dinghy ashore. So we've made it a little bit more complicated for ourselves. But of course, we have so much great technology at our fingertips, at our disposal. And it goes back to that classic, get as much information as you can about the place you're going to be sailing to and through, and just stay alert.
Yes, and having said that, we will cock up again, and I'm sure anyone watching will also cock up. I think that's it for today.
Yeah, well, hopefully that made us all feel a little bit better about ourselves.
Yes. Own up, it makes you feel better. Get it off your chest. Be honest with the world. Stop being one of these people who never drags anchor or hits bottom. You're lying.
Shit happens.
Yeah.